We zijn nog steeds op de TechDays natuurlijk. We zitten hier met Bart de Smet. Origineel uit België, maar hij woont al menig jaar in de VS, dus we doen het interview in het Engels. Hij heeft zelfs een presentatie gegeven en hij gaat er nog een aantal doen. In totaal doet hij er 5, dus best wel iemand met kennis. Dus we switch to English. Bart, very welcome.
Yeah, nice to be here.
You just had your session about .NET?
Yeah, C#, C# 7.0, like the latest and greatest release of C#. Went over all the new stuff, like just introducing all the new language features, how people can be more productive in Visual Studio 2017, those kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are a lot of visitors to your.
Oh yeah, it's a big room. I'm
room?
there for 5 times, so I'm gonna put my bed over there, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are the highlights for you that are new? What are the most important new innovations or features that you really think everyone should know?
I see, yeah. I think the main thing is that C#, if I talk purely about C# and .NET, the first thing is that .NET has become multi-platform. So like .NET can run anywhere, whether it's like Windows or Linux or any kind of thing, any operating system, any environment. So that's the first thing with .NET Core. The second thing is also, I think, more of a meta point. The meta point being that we've modernized the whole stack to be lightweight and portable, but we've also modernized the engineering mechanisms, the way that we build .NET, the way that we build C#. And so what that has led us to is that we have everything in the open now, like on GitHub, so there's a lot more people in the community that can contribute. People can see the sausage making, they can see how we do things, how things are being built, so much more openness. And then as an implication of that, we actually ended up in a situation where we can start shipping much more fast. A good example is C# itself, like C# 7 is really one of the first releases where we have a lot of language features that are all small. And so you would sort of look at them each individually and you would say, well, I may use this once or twice, I may use this a couple of times, and so on. It's the sum of the parts that's bigger, right? We can move the language forward much quicker than we could before. And so what we're going to see is like much more point releases, like C# 7, 7.1, 7.2, because we have this more agile process. We can like evolve much quicker. And so that's good for everyone. Like it's good for us. We can build tools that make people much more productive. We can actually focus much more on creating value as opposed to dealing with legacy build systems and those kind of things. We can take contributions from community. That's been quite phenomenal. Like the .NET repo has a lot of people in the community that have been helping out. And then for all the developers building apps and services and cloud solutions, it's a platform that's really alive and vibrant. So that's always a good thing. Yeah.
Innovation phase is very much fastened.
Yeah.
Are there any things that people are watching this at home and maybe thinking, hey, I needed to be there, I missed the session. Of course they can watch it back, but are there any key points you would say they would really need to read up on or really take an eye on to see how they can improve themselves maybe in C#?
Yeah, I see. I would say the best source to go is really all the videos we have on Channel 9 and from build conferences and all those tech conferences, including TechDays over here.
Are there now really things that you say, okay, these are the new innovations in version 7 that you say?
Oh yeah, the core features, I would say a couple of things. Tuples is a big thing. That's the ability to take multiple values and bundle them up together.
Okay.
So you can use them in collection types, you can use them as return types out of functions. A whole bunch of convenience features that just make the language more concise. I will just highlight one, pattern matching. So with pattern matching it becomes much easier to do a lot of type checking, for example. So say that you have an object and you want to check whether it's a circle or it's a square or it's a shape or it's this, that, the other thing. A lot of ceremony in the past, like a lot of variables you have to declare, a lot of type checks you have to do, a lot of casts you have to write. Like now we have much more concise ways of expressing that. And then maybe just a last one to point out, local functions. Local functions allow you to actually have a body of code within a method. So like if you have a little helper function, traditionally people do refactorings and they just go to a method, they say refactor this thing out, and if you look at the result of a refactoring, you often will scratch your hair. You will say like, well, this thing has 5 ref parameters, it has 7 out parameters, like, oh my god, what happened here? And that's because you have to pass everything to the extracted method in order to mutate it or to read from it. And so if you have local methods, you can actually write them in the same scope as all your variables. So they have access to all the variables in read and write. So you don't have to pass a whole bunch of stuff around, and it's ideal for like little auxiliary functions. Like you're writing some core algorithm, and in there, you want just to have a little, say, Boolean function that checks a predicate, and you want to use it 25 times. And it needs access to a whole bunch of variables that are in the local function. Now, in the past you had only one option, right? Like create another method. Well, or you could create a delegate, and that's very expensive. Or you could say, let me introduce a class, but then you're off to the races because you have to like introduce a whole new type with private members and all that kind of stuff. So now you sort of have more flexibility in the place where you are. So you can, return multiple values with tuples. You have much more concise syntax for a lot of things that people have traditionally done with a lot of pain, like sticking forks in their legs. And then, on top of that, you have the ability to refactor core algorithms and core data structures that you have using local functions that make it easier to compose those things.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
But really important, I guess, for the people watching that they know what's new in version 7.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there any new functions coming up that you think are also relevant?
Yeah. So there's no stuff coming up in the next releases actually to keep an eye on.
Because what is the phase? You just mentioned that the phase is becoming faster.
Yeah.
Is there a roadmap where you can see when 7.1 is coming?
Totally. Yeah. So 7.1 is just out now.
Okay.
We're working on 7.2, and actually all of the language design meetings, all the discussions, all of that stuff happens on GitHub.
Okay.
So if people go to github.com/.net/C#lang, lang for language, L-A-N-G, you can actually read all of the proposals of language features, what's scheduled for 7.1, 7.2 and 8.0.
Is the release date already available for 7.2?
No, like
or a month or?
Well, yeah, so what we want to do with the point releases is sort of get into a cadence of being able to release every couple of months.
Okay.
Like, whether it's 1 month, that's likely on the short end, we're coming from multi-year, to very fast pace. But, C# is no longer tied to the Visual Studio releases. So for example, C# 7.1 is an in-place update to Visual Studio 2017. You can also use it in Visual Studio Code, a whole bunch of other places. And so we're no longer tied to the big product. So we can actually have much more point releases. The 8.0 release is currently being looked at. There's a whole bunch of features on the table that are candidates. As usual, there's no promise, which ones will get in.
You also see an influence from Linux, for example, that you now see that you're building functions into C# that are more Linux based.
Well, I would say that's more the core CLR, like the core.NET framework is now compatible to run on different operating systems, including Linux.
So you're also getting new developers in.
Yes.
They were Linux based and now.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I would say one of the best examples of that is PowerShell.
Okay.
Like PowerShell is built in .NET. It's been completely retargeted to .NET Core, which has been a phenomenal undertaking by the PowerShell team. Like it's not a small product, like there's a lot of stuff in it that now completely runs on Linux. So that allows us to, have manageability stacks that stretch all the platforms, all the clouds, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that it goes both ways. One way is we can contribute a lot to other ecosystems where people didn't have availability of, our languages, our tools. In the past we had things like Mono, which were great, they allowed some customers in there as well. It wasn't as high touch of a contact, right? Now with .NET Core, it's truly open, it builds all the time, it's unified. It's not like you have different flavors of .NET, there's just one .NET Core. It's the same code running on Windows, the same code running on Linux, modulo, some low-level plumbing that's required to make it work on those platforms. And from a language point of view, it's decoupled, right? If people are comfortable with C# and they want to build stuff for, Azure, or they want to build it for AWS, or they want to use container technology, or they want to ship in Linux.
So you see a growth of developers coming from the Windows platform that are now using Linux with the help of PowerShell, for example.
Yeah.
But also developers that were usually on Linux, they're now also investing in C Sharp.
C Sharp and .NET, like those are becoming available, and we've had pretty good feedback, like of people that have been there and sort of been, not cursed, I would say, but like have sort of been dealing with other languages, and then they see, for example, like C Sharp has some very good stuff in it that people wish that they would have available. And in the past, a big excuse could have been, well, we have stuff on Windows, but we also have stuff that needs to run elsewhere, or like we want to build, say, a mobile app, and like we can't tie ourselves to one platform. And so that barrier is gone. There's still a lot more work to do. There's always a lot of work, but I think it's a very good evolution.
Yeah. Now you came all the way from Seattle to do 5 sessions here.
Yeah.
Are you also going to visit a session to learn for yourself? Or?
Yeah, I'll take a look on the agenda. To go somewhere after I'm done with all 5. So I'll just be around and
are there any subjects you're interested in?
Well, there's a lot of stuff I've been working with myself, but the latest and greatest in, for example, SQL Server, I don't get to use it that much anymore because, I'm actually working at Microsoft in the Bing team, so I'm working on search engines and backends, and it's a whole different architectural approach. And so, touching base with, a lot of technologies, including things like SQL Server, a lot of Azure assets, like, we use a lot of Azure in our organization, as you can imagine, but there's always new stuff coming really quick, so likely drop into a bunch of talks on things like Service Fabric, stuff in the Azure stack, things to do with SQL Server 2017, the new releases, those kind of things. But
you're in the development team for Bing?
That's right, yeah. Yeah.
And do you think Bing will become a bit larger in the Netherlands? Because I know in the US it's pretty big, because they also have a lot of local data. That's the part that's a bit missing here.
That's the tricky thing with something like a search engine and like all the experiences on top. In the past it was purely search. Now we have a lot of other things like speech. People interface with a search engine using speech and natural input. People want to have local data, as you say. And it's really about content providing, like how to get access to all of that content. I can't really comment on the roadmap of going to other places, but yeah, what we're doing is like we're trying to work on like platformizing Bing so that it becomes much more API centric and that people can use things that are in there. And so a good example of that is, for example, Azure has now a search service, so search as a service. Cosmos, which is a database asset that comes out of the Bing world originally, has also become democratized in that space. And so if you look at things like search as a service, if you look at anything to do with searching pictures, if you look at machine learning over web data, simple things like extracting telephone numbers out of text, like a lot of those things are driven by Bing services, but they're kind of exclusively used in that context. And so we're working on platformizing a lot of those assets so that people can actually use much more APIs. And I would say a lot of that stuff is actually surfacing through Cortana. Like Cortana used to be a Windows only play. We now have it available on every mobile operating system as well. We have it on iOS and Android. It's also coming into Skype. It's sitting in a whole bunch of places. And if you think about search, Bing is more than that. Like, it's a collection of services, and the whole angle of personal assistance, is kind of the next frontier in a way.
Yeah, I think bringing it to other ecosystems and that developers can use Bing in their own apps. That's
exactly.
For us in the Netherlands to make Cortana bigger and Bing bigger, we first need the language, and that's Dutch. I mean,
that's right.
That's a waiting game. But I do think that bringing it broader, that it's maybe the best way to enlarge also your market share, because that's a tough game.
That's indeed a very tough game, and it's also picking the markets. It's a natural thing to focus on the big markets first, and sort of like solidify the technology. There's a lot of diminishing returns for a lot of small markets. And so yeah, it's on the roadmap to do stuff, in more places. But when and how, I can't comment on at this point. Yeah.
Okay. You're not doing sessions on Bing, only on C#?
No, yeah, it's purely the internals. It's really, I'm coming down as an engineer working on large-scale services, and so I'm here to show people like the stuff we do, the stuff we use, like just upgraded our own code base to C#7. Got immediate gains out of it, like in terms of productivity. Same with the talk about performance tomorrow. What I'm gonna do there is talk about a whole bunch of pitfalls that we've run into building a very big service and trying to avoid those mistakes being made by people in the audience, so they can learn from it, can learn from our mistakes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, it was my pleasure.